Well, welcome. Thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure. I don't know how many of you were here also for Sinan's talk. I think only one, which is a good thing because Sinan is a hard act to follow. So, and actually, I saw a little bit of his presentation when I saw the video feed, and he showed all the network pictures that needed to be shown. So you've seen enough networks for today, right? So I mean, I can probably get away with this presentation without showing you any network graphs whatsoever. Or there will be a very tiny network graph, but if you blink your eyes, you will not even see it. The presentation of today is about teams and creativity. And let me first briefly introduce myself so you have a little bit of an idea of where I'm coming from. I am currently a professor of intra-organizational networks, networks as in social networks, not in computer networks, at Tilburg University in the organization studies group. And before this, I was a professor of networks in market and product innovation at the University of Groningen. And way before that, I got my PhD in sociology. So as you'll see, I have, actually my MSc is in econometrics, so I have a little bit of a diverse background. Econometrics, sociology, management, organization studies, which is why my research portfolio tends to be a little eclectic from time to time. Well, I'll try to focus on one particular project in this presentation that is actually not that typical for what I usually do. People who've seen me present will likely expect a lot of network pictures. I already told you that that's not going to happen. They'll probably expect a lot of statistics, but a lot of Greek symbols. That's not going to happen at all. I will not show you any table or any p-value or whatsoever, and certainly no likelihood function or anything like that. In that way, it will be a rather atypical presentation that I think it would be time for me to give other talks as well. So that's why I'm trying it out today. So what I'm going to be talking about with you today is the creativity of teams, and I'll be talking a little bit first about how this research project that I'll discuss with you, how that fits in with a larger research program that I'm doing, and so you have a little bit of the context of why I look at this and some other variables. I probably am looking at other variables that you have in your mind when you think about creativity in teams, but not just in this particular project, but in the larger program. Then I'll discuss a little bit about what is the effect of competition on the creativity of teams. So what is the effect of the fact that teams may be in competition with one another on how they produce creative ideas. And then finally, I'll move to the main part of the research for today, which is how is that moderated by the gender composition of teams? Is it that female teams deal differently with competition than male teams? And the answer is yes, and I'll discuss with you how that is. Is their creativity different from male teams or versus female teams? Is that creativity different? And does that also depend on the extent to which they feel competition? I hope that whenever you have a question, just interfere, just raise your hand, speak up. Don't wait until the end, because there may not be. I just heard we have to be out of here by 2, so there may not be sharp even, which is actually for a Dutch person very difficult, because in the Netherlands, when in academia, when you have to start at 2, it always means 15 minutes after 2. We have what we call academic quarter of an hour, and so as Dutch people, we are not used to the sharp part of this timing. So I'll try to I'll go for 1:45, and then I'll add the 15 minutes that way. Okay, so please, when you have a question, speak up. Don't wait until the end. So this is part of a larger research program where I am studying the creativity of teams. So not the creativity of individuals, not the creativity of individuals in teams, but the creativity of the team as a whole. So to what extent is a team able to what extent does a team display creativity in what they do and their output? I studied that in different ways. Most of what I've done so far is studying the creativity of teams as a function of the networks within the team. So you know the people in the team, you know the relationships that they have, and you measure different kinds of networks, like work-related, hierarchical, friendship networks, and so on. And you look at the different network structures, different ways, the different roles that people play, the different structures that you could find within the network, segmentation, centralization, so on, and look at how does that affect the creativity of the team. Much of the research has been that I've done is in that particular part of the program. Also, studying the creativity of teams as a function of their external network. So both in terms of the position of the team in the overall team network, but also looking at, well, who maintains the relationships? Is there a formal relationship between teams, or is the relationship between teams maintained by individuals? And multiple individuals or one individual and so on. This fits within what is often called multi-team systems. In fact, I tend to call it not just MTS as most people do, but I call it MOMTS, because this what I study is multi-organizational multi-team studies systems. So these are teams that do not just together make up a larger system, but actually these teams are affiliated with different organizations in different parts of the world usually. And they also bring with them the the culture and the way of working and the goals of their organization. They may be co-located or not, and that's another part of how I explain creativity, by the conditions under which these teams have to work. Either there's co-location of the individuals, or co-location or not between the teams in the multi-team system. But also, for example, the level of competition that the team experiences, whether or not the members of a team are members of multiple teams. That has a very different effect, especially when you look at information exchange between teams within the system. It makes a big difference whether every member is just a member of one team, or whether people actually are part of multiple teams, and that way are very natural boundary spanners. Communication modalities, obviously when you look at multi-organizational multi-team systems, where teams are across the globe, the different communication modalities that people use becomes very important. To what extent does it matter whether you use face-to-face or telephone or video conferencing or email and so on? So we look at the different, as we call, ensembles of communication modes that teams use, and how does that explain their creativity. So that's one part of the project, of the program. And finally, we look at the composition of the teams themselves, which in a way is the least interesting to me, because it has been researched the most already. But if you combine aspects, so if you look at the composition under competition, for example, all of a sudden you enter into territory that is largely unexplored. Today I'll be talking about composition. In a previous study, we looked at composition change and how that affects the creativity of teams under competition conditions. And there's just so much unexplored. We know a lot about what makes an individual creative. We actually know very little about what makes a team creative, which is a pity, because most of the creative work in organizations is done in team settings. So if you want to understand the creative performance of and the innovative performance of organizations, you need to be able to understand the innovative performance and creative performance of teams, because that's where the creativity happens. And then it's a pity that we know much about the individual, but we also know that putting creative individuals together into a team doesn't make for a creative team. So how does the constellation of people within the team and the way that they work actually lead to the creativity of the team as a whole? That's still largely unexplored territory, and this entire program explores that. my main collaborators, I work with many collaborators, and you know, everyone who is interested in this topic, I'd be happy to discuss any possibilities. The main people that I've been working with over the recent years, it's Jan Kratzer, who is at the Technical University of Berlin, Jo van Engelen at the University of Groningen, Greg Oldham, well-known OB researcher at Tulane University, Marcus Beer at Washington University, St. Louis, and Abhijit Vadera at the Indian Business School in India. So as you see, it's quite a diverse team. Certainly, we know a lot now about dispersed collaboration because we rarely actually see each other face to face. So this is the main name that they work with. Okay. Now let's look at competition, because once we understand how competition affects team creativity, then we can make it a little bit more difficult and look at, well, how does it then affect, how does competition then affect the team creativity once you start working with different team compositions? Now, the competition between teams is something that is increasingly organized in organizations. Increasingly, organizations create some kind of a competitive environment between teams in order to spur creativity of the teams. At least that's the idea. You see it a lot in Japan, in product development, departments in Japan, where 5 or 6 or 7 teams all work on, basically the same product, and only one of them eventually, if at all, only one of them will actually be able to finalize the development and then bring the product to the market. So they're basically competing with each other, and they're regularly contrasted their performance, and then teams drop off, and at the end there's one left or none left, but certainly not more than one. So you know that most of the efforts by the teams ends up in not being able to bring your product to the market. So there's huge competition between the teams, and the idea is that competition between these teams will make them more creative. But also outside of the organization field, on the internet, for example, there are lots of platforms now for people to develop products and to come up with ideas for products for organizations that are based on competition. Organization has a need for a new product, posts that on the forum. People all go and develop new products for that, and then only one wins and is awarded. This is the best idea. This is what we're going to pursue, and the award can be financial award or just status or some kind of points that you can gain. But much of that again is organized through competition, and the basic idea is that competition should be good for creativity because it makes people try harder. It makes people try to come up with the best ideas in order to outwit the competition, collaborate harder. That way, they should be more creative. That's the basic idea of why these firms and internet platforms try to stimulate competition between teams. The question, though, is that really true? Does that make sense? When we started this research, our initial inkling was that can just not be true. It doesn't make sense. I would imagine, at least that was our thinking at the beginning of the project. We would imagine that competition would help a little bit, but at some point when competition becomes fierce, people will just get stifled. I can't deal with it anymore. And if you put enough pressure on people, they'll, at some point, at least that was our original thought, that mean that their creativity should falter. Of course, we had no idea whether that would actually also be true. If this were true anyway, we didn't know whether that would be true also for teams, but at least that was our initial thought. But we figured, so if there's so much interest in creating competition in actual practical settings, but we have the idea that actually may not be such a good idea, at least we should explore, who's right. Is competition indeed positive for creativity, or are we correct that there's some kind of level after which creativity really should drop? So that's why we started this project on competition and creativity. And this is a project with Marcus Buer, Greg Oldham, and Abhijit Vadera. First part of this project, where we look at membership change, was published, I think, 2 years ago, so Academic Management Journal. Today I'll be presenting a follow-up study where we look at the effects of composition within this picture. So this is the basic idea, and so if you first just look at the only things you look at is creativity and competition. Then what you see is indeed it looks like there is some kind of a positive effect. Overall, if you look at many teams and you look at you compare the effect, the extent to which the team members experience competition and their creativity, you see that there is a positive effect. However, the effect is very small. There is some effect, and if you look at all these teams and you run all the regressions, you look at all the plots, you basically see the positive effect. It is significant, but it's not significant in terms of a large size. So one thing is there is an effect, but it's not very strong. At the same time, what you see is if you look a little deeper, you see that some teams become extremely creative and others completely uncreative. You see, for some teams, their creativity goes up. For other teams, their creativity goes down. So if you take everything together, you'll find a positive, slightly positive effect, but that will be aggregating over very different effects. So there have to be some kind of moderating variables explaining why for some teams there's a positive effect, for other teams there's a negative effect, or there are different kinds of effects altogether, or zero effects. There are variables that moderate the relationship between the competition and the creativity of the team. So one moderator to look at is the fluidity of the team, or the openness of the team. And what you see here is a picture where competition increases here. This is the creativity at the team level, and what you see here is two groups. These are closed groups. Closed groups are defined as no composition change. They start with a particular setup, and they go through a series of tasks, and then over time you follow them, and what you see is that as competition increases, they tend to become more creative up to a point. And it drops off here, but we don't really know what would happen beyond this because we only measured it up to this level. But overall, it seems to be like there's generally a positive effect. Open groups, these are groups that lose a member and gain a member. So someone drops out of the group, others come into the group. In fact, in this case, this is a particular setting that I'm showing you here, which is where the team member, the new member that comes in, actually is from a former competing team. Again, this is something that you see a lot, where you have organizations, again, like for example, in the Japanese example that I gave, where teams start, like 5 or 6 teams start on a development project, only one of them finishes. At some point, teams are terminated, and those team members may be assigned to the team that is allowed to continue. So then the team has to incorporate team members that they were in competition with before.
So what happened was, did the open group start selecting new members that were more resistant or more competitive than the other team? Did they actively go and seek out new members and pick out the ones that were not as competitive?
They actually did not have any say over who came in, who came out. So they were just assigned by management. They were just assigned a new member, someone to be removed from the team, and a new person to enter the team from a competing team. So they had absolutely no say in who they were going to get. The other thing that they knew, and they knew about the person, is that, well, this is someone that we competed with before. They may know the person or may not have known the person yet, or have experience with the person or not, but the main thing here is that you work on a task and you are competing against all the other teams. All of a sudden, you have to work with someone that you competed with before on that task. Thank you. So basically, what you see here is that as competition increases, so basically at this side there will be virtually no competition. Excuse me? Yeah, these are fitted. Yeah, this is just from a previous research project. These are just the fitted curves from the basically from the regression analysis. So basically, so what you see is that as competition increases, First of all, the open groups decrease in their creativity, and then they increase. This makes perfect sense. This is what you would expect, because you get a newcomer into your team whom you used to compete with. Then as the initial reaction is, well, we're not going to assimilate you. I mean, you're a competitor. We're not going to work with you. Well, if that happens, obviously, that cannot be good for the creativity team, because the collaborative process of the team will be severely hampered. So what you see is that as the new person comes into the team, so basically you already lose someone that you work with, and now someone comes in that you're not willing to incorporate it to your process. That should certainly have an effect on the process that the team goes through, and basically reduces the collaboration within the team. Once the competition increases, though, teams have no choice but to cooperate, because they know if we do not accept that person and make that person a full member of our team, we're going to lose the competition. So we have no option but to collaborate. This is often called cutthroat cooperation. So basically, you're cooperating with a knife to your throat. That's the basic idea. Is the competition is so fierce, you have to collaborate whether you like it or not. And then what you see is that, again, basically the effect of collaborating picks up again. This means structural adaptation theory would perfectly predict this. So this is one of the moderators that we've looked at in the past, and where we see that there is an effect of in this case composition or composition change that moderates the effect of competition on creativity. So just by looking at this, and I'll be talking about gender in a little bit, but just by looking at this, you can already see that, well, if you were to completely ignore the different groups and the change in the groups and just look at competition versus creativity, yes, you would find some kind of a positive effect. And it would be relatively minor. So yeah, you would find it, but it wouldn't really tell you much because the effect is strongly moderated. What I'd like to talk to you about today is another moderator, which is the gender composition of a team. The reason that we looked at this is that if you look at the labor participation, the increase in the participation rate of women is fundamental in terms of the structure of who works in organizations. The recent expectation was that in 2014 there will be 67 million women in the active workforce versus 86 million men in the United States. So that's more or less 50-50. Actually, it's already about 50-50 right now. It's just lower than these numbers, which is a significant difference from 10 to 15 years ago. And much of what we know about how organizations work and about the effects of gender in organizations is based on older research where the participation rate of women was lower. So the question is, once more and more women enter into organizations, and then they'll enter into the teams that are supposed to be creative, does it actually affect how these teams deal with their competitive environment? Well, we don't know. And the interesting thing is, if you go look at the literature, it's very, very difficult to find a paper dealing with that. We found, I think, only like 3 or 4 papers that remotely study how gender moderates the effect of competition on creativity of teams. There's a lot of studies on the individuals, but not on how that works out at the team level. So even though we do see that increasingly women are part of these teams, both at the work floor or at the top management level, increasingly you see that teams that need to be creative are composed of women. It's very, almost completely unknown how that actually affects how these teams can be creative. So, from a practical point of view, it makes a lot of sense to at least try to understand that and see if there is some kind of an effect of gender composition. Now, the current findings, and again, this is just based on a very few papers, is that men and women as individuals respond differently to competition, and overall, women are more creative than men as individuals. But we have no idea what it means when you put them together, whether that effect would still hold up. There is literature from the diversity angle saying that diversity is good for creativity. Now the thing is that it's rarely defined what kind of diversity is good for creativity. And in fact, in the research studies that we've seen on diversity and team level creativity, you see that diversity both seems to result in high creativity and extremely low creativity. So the variance in terms of the creativity is much higher in diverse teams than in homogeneous teams. So homogeneous teams will rarely be wildly creative, but they'll also be rarely low in creativity, whereas the more diverse teams tend to be at the extremes of the continuum. That's what we kind of know from some of the research, but still we have no clue what that means in competitive environments, whether that would still be true. And whether that would be true for gender as the diversity measure. So what we did was to design a study where we looked at different levels of competition, different gender competitions, and then looked at, well, how does that really affect, how does the composition of a team in terms of gender, how does that affect how the team responds to creativity, to competition? So in order to figure out what we would expect, let's first look at, well, what would happen without competition? Would you expect male teams or female teams, which of the two would you expect to be more creative? Well, let me ask you first. Which of the two would you expect? So no competition. Let's just look at the two extremes. Teams with just females, teams with just males. So let's forget about all the mixtures of levels. Which of the two would you expect to be more creative and why?
Female individuals are more creative than males, and we would also expect that all teams would be more creative.
Even though creative people together not necessarily make for a creative team. Dankjewel. Male teams? Okay, well, at least we have both flavors down, yeah?
Let's say, like one of the countries, like males are a little bit more competitive than females, so that in China, like males compete with each other, so that these are things that they higher than the creative product of females. Because in China, females may not be competitive against each other.
Okay, so the argument would be that the competition internal to the team would be good for the joint creativity.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm just taking inventory.
So I might have missed this, but what do you mean creativity? Like, how are you measuring creativity? Is it more like median from what's normal, or is it what's the producing, or is it?
Yeah, I'll look at it in two different ways. Because I'll report a couple of studies. One is the deviance from what you would expect for a team, for a particular task. So is a team more or less creative than what you usually get? And we also measured it in terms of the output. We just had outsiders rate different the dimension of creativity. So the originality. So basically, what we look at here is that in order for an idea to be creative, it has to be original and feasible. And there are different ways. Basically, we look at different operationalizations, and either way, we will basically find the same thing. So, you know, it's I know either of those. So what people would normally think about in terms of creativity, that's probably also captured here. Okay.
So you're kind of also measuring success too. I mean, in order for something to be wildly creative and different from what you expected, but if it's not going to work, then would that be considered creative?
No, in most definitions of creativity, and that's also what we followed, is that it's not just a matter of it being original or unique or you know, one of a kind, but also has to be feasible. It has to be, at least it should in theory be, you know, in theory makes sense, or in theory it should work or be applicable. If you come up with something that is completely crazy and could never work, that is usually not considered creativity in research, and also in our case, we don't consider that. So it should be, at least in theory, it should be feasible. Okay. Yeah. That's fine, yeah. Well, that's the male reaction, right? Bill 5. So let's, if you look at the theory, what would the theory say? The main theory in this field is gender role theory. It says that people are likely to you know, adhere to what is, you know, their gender role. So basically, you know, as a woman, what are you expected to do? As a man, what are you expected to do? That's basically, that's how a gender role is defined. If you look at the gender roles, in just the distinction between men and women, in the literature, there's usually a distinction that's usually built up on two dimensions. There's the communion and the agency. The communion effect says that women, more so than men, are supposed to be communal, in the sense that, you know, they work together, they care for each other, they're concerned with each other, they're more expressive. So basically, they're more than men into building, you know, a communal environment. If that happens, you would expect that collaboration would certainly be higher among women than among men, right? If you have people completely following these gender rules for now, then women should be more collaborative among each other than men would be, which, well, basically that would fit with what you just said. Since collaboration and cooperation is positive for creativity, you would expect, based on this, you would expect women to be more creative, a women team be more creative than a male team. The dimension of agency says that men, and more so than women, tend to be agentic, you know, dominant, self-reliant. Actually, we already experienced that a little bit just now. They'll compete among each other and show their independence. So where women, according to general theory, are more communal and try to build, you know, a system where everyone gets along, the male gender role would say that men are more likely to show their independence and, you know, not to build the relationships and the shared sentiment between everyone all the time. So in that way, you would expect that male teams would have less of a collaborative process than female teams. So both from a communal point of view and an agentic point of view, would expect female teams to be more creative than male teams. simply because they are more into the collaborative process that leads to creativity. So from the theory, and the general theory is the main theory that is evoked in the literature in this case, this is what you would expect.
How do you, I mean, in that context, how do you incorporate the task concept, the role of task concept? And sometimes I feel like for anything to be creative, some spark is necessary. So I am, again, I can speculate that females are more likely to be corporate, maybe less likely to engage in content, and maybe I think they might have a tough concept with creativity. And on the other hand, maybe I can think maybe it's more competitive internally, but that means they can also engage in tough concepts which may be good for creativity.
In general, if you look at the effect of conflict on team creativity, what you see is that you have to make a distinction between two kinds of conflict. So the conflict more at the interpersonal level, and the conflict at the substantive level. So that deals with the exact thing, the thing that we're doing that we're supposed to solve. Now, obviously, at the interpersonal level, you do not want to have conflict, and that's consistently been shown to be negative for creativity. So you would expect. I haven't really seen any studies on this, but intuition would say that keeping everything equal, that males would be more likely to enter into interpersonal conflict than females, just by by virtue of them being more agentic and women being more communal, which would be negative for creativity. When it comes to the conflict in terms of substance, I think that the term conflict is, it's a bad term, because conflict has a negative connotation. I tend to call it productive disagreement, meaning that the thing that is good for a team in terms of creativity, and we've studied over 1,000 of teams. Looking at the disagreement between team members, and what kinds of disagreements work and what kinds of disagreements don't work, and so on. And what we consistently found was that when you say something that I don't agree with, and I tell you, well, I don't think you're right, but we positively discuss our disagreement from a substantive point of view, and there's nothing personal going on, just a substance. That is great for creativity. And we see that those teams wildly outperform the ones that either do not get into the discussion, you just say something and I ignore you, or we get into a fight. But the ones where you constantly are in discussion with each other in a respectful manner, and constantly respectfully disagreeing with each other, basically you keep each other sharp in a way. That's great. I would expect, but again, I haven't seen studies on that, I would expect that would be more likely in women teams than in male teams, because given the communal tendency for the female gender role, you would expect that they're more likely to, in a friendly manner, discuss substantive issues. And it can be a strong discussion, but it's still in a positive, caring way, rather than you making a point and I just trying to beat you, which is not very productive. Brooke?
So did you, when you evaluate the creativity, did you evaluate the process?
No, just the output. We did look at the process also. I mean, we measured that, but the creativity, when I talk about creativity, I look at the, we measure the output in terms of creativity.
I'm going to vote for the women's team, but for a slightly different reason.
Okay.
I think, I'm going to vote for the male team as the ultimate.
Okay.
But I think it's because the women's teams will be more afraid to take a risk with their final output and think your measure. The one that they're basically deviant from the normative solution that the women's teams may have come up with a much more creative idea along the way, but since they're the stigmatized gender in most workplaces, they'd be much less likely to take a risk on something that they outright this person or this can't.
Okay. I'll get to I'll get to that in a slightly different way, but that'll actually come up. Okay, so we already talked about that. And actually, in terms of networks, obviously I couldn't resist to talk about networks at least a little bit. It's interesting to look at, to consider what this would mean in terms of the collaboration network inside of the organization, inside of the team. If the male gender role is to engage in competition and to display independence, you would expect a more centralized collaboration structure and even a more segmented structure with more hierarchy. Whereas for the females, if everyone were to live up to the female gender role, you basically would expect more of a fully dense network with much lower hierarchical and status differences, and basically zero centralization. Okay, so what we did in our study is we looked at these teams, and we, besides measuring their creativity, we also looked at the process, at the collaborative process within the team, and I'll show you how we measured that and how we did that. But our basic argument is that the effect of composition is being mediated by collaboration. So the gender so the gender composition will lead to a collaborative process, and the collaborative process is what drives the creativity. Right. So at least some network pictures here, right? And this is, by the way, this is something that we have found in our studies, but that has been shown a lot in the literature. So this is really not new. That indeed the collaborative process, and the more collaborative the process is, and the more positively collaborative it is, the higher the creativity tends to be. So there is a positive relationship. So this is something that is, at least as a mediator, we know that would work. Right. So basically, what we find is that in the no competition or very low competition situation, that women teams are indeed more creative than male teams. However, if you introduce competition, and I'll go fast because I see that the people are lining up already for less than 5 minutes. So if you increase the competition, what you get is that the gender roles do not just describe how people behave, but also prescribe what people are at least supposed to do. It's kind of normative. What you would get then is that women identifying with their gender roles would identify with the situation that they're communal and they're not very competitive. Whereas males, their male gender role would prescribe, let's say, if you follow the gender role completely, the male gender role would prescribe that when competition really increases, that's when males are at their best, right? And that will be the basic stereotype of males versus females. The idea is that as you increase the pressure on people, people will tend to identify with the stereotype to a larger extent. So the more pressure you put on people, and the more difficult you make it on people, the more they'll conform to the stereotype. So the more, for females, this would mean that as you increase competition, and females are supposed to not compete and to always be communal and work together and keep the atmosphere nice and so on, they should feel that they're not in the situation where they belong. They're not liked. They don't want to compete. They're not competitive, by role, but they are in a competitive situation. So the effect would be that women would be expected to dissociate from the situation and to not spend that much effort anymore because they're just not comfortable in that environment and in that particular role. Whereas men, being more competitive by nature, and at least by role and by stereotype, but men would feel completely at home because this is indeed a situation where they can compete, where they can show their superiority and compete for dominance. In which case, the males would actually start collaborating more because this is the situation where they are more at home. So I'm just really condensing the argument. Obviously, it's much more intricate, but I'm really condensing it for time reasons. But the basic idea is that the stereotype and the stigmatization of women would lead them to feel uncomfortable in a very competitive situation, whereas men would tend to feel more at home in competitive situations. Anyway, so we did this. We studied this effect in several ways. I'll show you two very quickly. One is a lab study where we looked at 90 four-person teams. We gave a creative task, and we have with all four-person teams. So these are the different levels of, in this case, men in the team, and we varied competition by around 20 or so. I think 18 to 21, something like that.
You do have to wrap up, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. So we have I guess if you look at the videotape of this, you can pause when you see the slides. Okay, so basically the collaboration was all videotaped, so we scored the group process and rated creativity, well, whatever, blah blah. Okay, so this is the first effect, and what you see here is that this is the women, this is the purely male groups, and indeed as competition increases, you see the women dropping off in terms of their creativity, and the male groups increasing their creativity. But we had 3 different levels of competition, so actually we could look at it a little bit in more detail. And what you see here is the effect between different levels of competition. And what you see is kind of interesting is this is still rather low levels of competition. So if you increase, the basic idea here is that if you increase the competition a little bit, that will be good. So that will basically reinforce the way that people work. Since women are more creative than men, then if you increase competition a little bit, they'll just outperform men further. But once you make the competition really prevalent, that's when the effect reverses, as we just discussed. Well, okay, we did the same thing in an actual organization and found basically the same results. This is just a field study where we didn't manipulate anything, we just measured, and we found the almost exact same effects. So in conclusion, there is a clear gender effect on how teams respond to different levels of competition that they experience. With male teams outperforming female teams on a high competition, but under low and intermediate competition, actually female teams do better. Which fits very well with the theory. Given the time, let's leave it at this. It was kind of a rush at the end.
Thanks.